Today I'm going to take you through the diet that's scientifically proven to melt your visceral fat by up to 14%. And this is really important because visceral fat is the most dangerous type of fat on your body. You see, unlike the fat that you can pinch with your fingers, visceral fat is hidden much deeper inside you. It wraps around your organs, fuels inflammation, and has the power to completely wreck your health. But the exciting news is that an 18-month clinical trial has found that one specific diet, rich in something called polyphenols, can really help to get it under control, even when calories are kept the same. I'm excited to take you through this one, so full screen the video and let's lock in. Now, this wasn't just some influencer blog post put up on Instagram or posted on TikTok. This was a peer-reviewed, randomized, controlled trial. We have to be quite careful these days. With Google and more recently with ChatGPT, everybody has got a study whenever you bring something up. But just like you would look at the quality of your food or your water, you need to be looking at the quality of the research and the scientific evidence. RCTs, randomized controlled trials, aren't the best, to be honest with you. The absolute top tier, best scientific research you can find is what we call meta-analysis, because these are studies of studies. But saying that, an RCT is one of the most reliable types of scientific evidence and research that we can get our hands on. Now, this study tracked 294 people over an 18-month period, which is longer than most nutritional studies will run for. And what they did was split the 294 people into three dietary groups. You had people who were following what we call healthy guidelines, so low fat, moderate carb, general kind of clean eating rules that you and I both know. Then the second group of people were eating what we call the standard Mediterranean diet, which is a diet built around whole foods. It puts a particular emphasis on lean protein sources, lots of plant food, so fruit and veg, and then whole grains as well. And then the third group of people were following what we call the green Mediterranean diet, which is similar to the standard Mediterranean diet, except this group of people also drank 3 to 4 cups of green tea per day and added in the special ingredient, which is something called duckweed, a polyphenol aquatic plant. Now, what made this study particularly interesting and added more credibility to it was the fact that across all three groups, across all participants, the calories were matched, which means that regardless of the group these participants were placed in, they were all eating the exact same number of calories. Now, all three groups, all three of these diets were pretty low carb. The participants were having about 80 grams of carbohydrates per day, which is a form of calorie restriction, particularly for people who are used to moderate or high carb intakes. For example, if you were following the standard American diet. But here's the kicker. The people who were in the healthy diet group, the first group, had a 4.2% reduction in visceral fat. The people who were in the Mediterranean diet group, the standard Mediterranean diet group, had a 6% reduction in visceral fat. But the people who were in the green Mediterranean diet group had a 14% reduction in visceral fat. Now, trust me when I say this, I've been a nutritionist for nearly 6 years now. This is very significant because we have to remember that this is despite the fact that all three of these groups, all nearly 300 participants, were eating the exact same number of calories. Now, of course, we have to bear in mind two things. Number one is that this is just one study, and we need to be able to repeat the findings of this across multiple studies before we can kind of conclusively stamp the approval on this. And secondly, we also have to factor in the reality that all of these participants will be living a different lifestyle, and the amount of visceral fat that they lost is going to be relative not just to the number of calories that they ate, but also the lifestyle that they lived. And whilst this study was controlling the amount of calories they were consuming, they were taking in, it doesn't seem to have any reference to how many calories they were burning. That being said, assuming that each of these groups had roughly 100 people in, seeing one of the groups have a 14% reduction, which is more than 100% what the second best group had, that is incredibly statistically significant. And of course, once you see results like this, it sends people like me down a little bit of a rabbit hole. And it seems that this study aligns with other emerging data on polyphenols, on gut health, and on fat distribution as well. That all being said, let's be really clear. You still need to be in a calorie deficit to lose fat. The amount that you eat is always going to be your start point, and you need to address that before you tackle what you're eating. A very extreme example that is far from ideal, and I'm definitely not recommending, is the McDonald's diet. People have literally gone to the lengths of proving that you can eat nothing else but McDonald's and still lose weight. So if you're gaining weight, regardless of what you eat, you're eating too much. But this is where food food quality really comes in. If we strip it all back, you've basically got a choice between whole foods and processed foods. Whole foods are produced, whereas processed foods are manufactured. Whole, single ingredient foods like meat, fish, fruit, veg, and certain carbs like rice and potatoes are less calorie dense, more filling, and loaded with micronutrients. On the other hand, processed foods are full of what we call empty calories. And we call them empty calories because 30 minutes after you have them, you're back at the snack cupboard. And of course, don't forget, I don't know why I'm looking at my hands, but don't forget that processed food also contains gut damaging chemicals. Now, we're going to be covering exactly what to eat in just a second, but before we do, let me quickly make it make sense why you want to be choosing whole foods over processed foods. Number one is what we've just talked about, the fact that these foods are less calorie dense and they keep you feeling fuller for longer. Number two is that they reduce inflammation, and it's inflammation that is driving up your visceral fat. And number three is that these foods support your gut health, which we now know is a central part of reducing visceral fat. This was supported by another study in 2023 that actually analyzed MRI scans and gut microbiomes from over 800 people. And what they found was pretty crazy. Only 2 gut bacteria strains were associated with overall body fat, but 16 distinct strains were directly linked to visceral fat. And what that means in English is that visceral fat is more influenced by your gut microbiome than subcutaneous fat, which is the fat under your skin. Why? Because the good bacteria in your gut can produce something called postbiotics, which have the power to improve insulin sensitivity, reduce inflammation, and increase fat oxidation. So what do we actually want to eat? Before we go into the specifics, just remember that your goal isn't to follow the perfect diet. You have to remember, and this is really important, that the best diet is the one that you can stick to. And as long as it helps you to create a small, consistent calorie deficit, which reduces inflammation, you're golden. But from this particular study and my personal experience of having helped hundreds of guys to burn fat over the last 6 years, the best thing that you can do is build your diet around principles. And the principle I'd recommend you start with is prioritizing PFW, protein, fiber, water. You really want to consciously try to build your meals around these 3. As well as filling you up, keeping you full for longer, and improving your insulin sensitivity, these foods help support your health at a cellular level. And considering you are literally just 37.2 trillion cells put together, I'd say that's pretty important. So when it comes to protein, at a bare minimum, you want to be hitting 100 grams per day, but try getting up to 1 gram per pound of your goal body weight. So very simply, if you want to weigh 180 pounds, you want to be building up to try and hit 180 grams of protein a day. That might sound like a lot right now, and don't worry, you don't need to do that tomorrow. Like I say, this is a target that you're going to build up to. As long as you're hitting that 100 gram per day minimum threshold, you're off to a good start. Then you want to be having plenty of leafy greens and berries, not just for your fiber, but for the polyphenols that we spoke about earlier. So I would aim for a couple 2 a day of blueberries, raspberries, or blackberries, and then plenty of spinach, arugula, or if you're hardcore, duckweed. Fermented dairy is another good one, so Greek yogurt, kefir, or even cottage cheese. Those add live cultures and more polyphenol precursors. And then the icing on the cake on top of these 3 is green tea. 2 to 4 cups a day can increase fat oxidation and deliver both of those key polyphenols. However, as I said, this is the icing on the cake. And if you wanted my honest personal opinion, I think at the absolute max, this is going to make 5% difference. But if you want to tick all the boxes, feel free to add it in. Just don't expect that you can do that and ignore everything else and get the results. Most important of all, don't chase perfection. Don't set arbitrary targets like, I want to lose 10 pounds in 5 weeks or 20 pounds in 10 weeks. What you want to do is set yourself up so you've got a deficit where you're losing 1 to 2 pounds of fat each week, because the speed that you're traveling at is far less important than making sure that you're actually pointing in the right direction and have a positive trajectory. So focus on consistent, manageable fat loss. And the best way to do that is to build your diet around the 80-20 rule, where 80% of the foods that you eat come from whole, single ingredient, nutrient dense foods. So the meat, the fish, the fruit, the veg, the carbs like rice and potato. But then that leaves 20% of the food for the treats, the snacks, the chocolate, whatever it might be that you love and look forward to, because that 20% is going to keep you consistent with this 80%. And if you try to be 100% all of the time, this is where you will fail. This is why so many guys fail. You don't want to do that. That's how you end up in the cycle of yo-yo dieting. And it's called yo-yo dieting because you end up right where you started. You can't see your visceral fat, but it's often the root cause of what's holding you back. So addressing it can have a really positive effect on your health. That being said, please remember, guys, that the Green Mediterranean diet isn't magic. It's a combination of a calorie-controlled diet made up of whole nutrient-dense foods with some specific anti-inflammatory compounds and polyphenol-rich foods sprinkled on top for good measure. But the truth is that your diet is just the start point. Visceral fat is influenced by your lifestyle just as much as it is by the food that you eat. So if you want the lifestyle to match the diet and really get on top of your visceral fat, watch this video next and I'll walk through exactly what works and what you can ignore.